Hey everyone, it's Zane Banks here, and in these troubled times with the coronavirus going crazy, I figured people are going to have a lot of time to practice guitar at home, so I'm going to do a series of lessons, the Corona series, for those of you who want to improve on your playing and just get a little bit of woodshedding in, because it looks like we're all going to have a lot of time at home. So, today I thought I would focus on country improvising. A question that I get asked quite a bit is, what scales do I use when I play country guitar? And it's a good question, so I'm going to go through that. This is the first of probably a series of videos I'll do on this topic, but I'll just give you a little introduction to it. The short answer is, I don't really think so much about the scales that I use when I'm improvising, and that might sound kind of strange because guitar players are so orientated on, like, this is a scale. I have a blues scale, I use that in my blues soloing, I have a mode that I use. But my approach to country guitar playing is very similar to an approach to jazz improvisation. In fact, the licks are different, but my mental approach is more or less the same. And that is, I play to the chord. So I think about whatever chord it is that I happen to be playing over, and I think of what are the essential notes in that chord. So for example, I just played a very brief A, D, A, E sort of chord progression there. If you go back and listen to that, you should hopefully be able to hear some of the really designated sort of waypoints that I hit that outline the harmonic progression. But essentially, with the A chord, I know that the tonic, which is an A, is a very strong note. Not that interesting, but it's very strong. If you've got a bass player, that's their job to play the bass note. The next most interesting note, probably the most interesting, is the major third, which in an A major chord is a C sharp note. It's really sweet. It's sort of the musical equivalent of a mango or watermelon, sweet and juicy. Then you have the fifth, which is going to be the note E. And that also is not that interesting, but it's very stable. Like the tonic and the fifth are almost like columns that prop up the roof. They have a very important function, but they're perhaps not as interesting as the sort of decorative work that is along the sort of the facade of the building. Then you've got the seventh. Now, the seventh is an interesting note. It's not always used. So if you're playing stuff that has a very bluesy, honky-tonk feel, then you have a bit of a free range to sort of use the seventh. And by that, I mean the dominant seventh, the flat 7th degree. Major sevenths, very rarely used in country music. So it is quite a spicy note, the dominant seventh. It's fantastic, but if you use it, it is a bit like putting sort of Cajun spices in your food, like it's going to dominate things. So I would think very much about the kind of holy trinity of notes, 1, 3, 5. Get familiar with those. Then what you want to start doing is you want to think about what are the notes, diatonic notes, and by that I mean the notes in the scale, on either side of those chord tones, which are acceptable to play. So if we look at an A major scale, we have an A. In between the A and the C sharp is the 2nd degree or the 9th, which is a B. Then in between the C sharp and the E is the 4th degree, also known as an 11th if you'd played up the octave, and that's a D. And then between the 5th and the 7th, the flat 7th, we have a 6th, and that is an F sharp. This is a major 6. So the gravitational pull of those chord tones is going to be so strong that when you hit one of those other notes, even though they are still accepted notes in an A major scale, it's going to want to eventually resolve down. And that is just the laws of tonal harmony in Western tonal music. But what you want to understand is that natural pull, the natural sort of physics, I guess, if you will, of those notes and how they sound. So that's why we get chords known as suspensions. When you have a sus2 or a sus4, the chord is in suspension. It wants to resolve to being either a major chord or a minor chord. And because music is all about tension, there's beauty in controlling that tension. When you can't control it, when the notes control you, that's when it sounds like you're not a great player. But when you can control the tension, then that's where fantastic improvising lays. So what I think about is I try and find, there's the caged system on the guitar. Now, I'm not a militant proponent of the caged system, but I think it is useful because you do want to know, like, there's an A major chord in the A shape or a G shape, they kind of share a bit. There's an A major chord using an E shape, using a D shape, using a C shape, using an A shape, and so forth. And I think that's useful because you can see where the scales and notes come from out of that. Now, the reason I'm not fixated on just playing scales is I think that when people only focus on scales, they kind of switch their ear off and they switch their mind off and just go, oh, here are 7 notes that I know are going to be fine. And so if you have a backing like, you just get a solo that meanders like, there's nothing wrong with what I played then, but it was pretty weak. Melodically, motiffically, rhythmically, nothing really happened, although I didn't play any wrong notes. When you think about the strong notes in the chord and the slightly weaker notes, and then you have the chromatic notes, then there's this hierarchy. And if you experiment and you use your ear, then you're going to come up with some really interesting things. And this is what I do with all chords. It doesn't matter whether it's a minor chord, a diminished chord, an augmented chord, a dominant seventh chord. They're all the same when it comes to approaching them. So with the stuff in A, I might look at like, okay, here is my A, or I've got my sort of G shape. I apologize if my guitar's slightly out of tune. And I know that the notes that I'm playing are more or less all the accepted notes in the actual chord of A major. So if I start here with the 2nd fret of the D string, that is an E, it's the 5th. So I know going up to the 4th fret on that note, I'm going to get that F sharp. It sounds really cool. It's what we get in the... So I could play around with that and have a lot of fun. I might go... like that. So what I've basically done there is I slid up to the F sharp. It wants to go back down. But that's not much of a story. It's like there was a princess at the end. So I get back down. And then often what you're looking, if you were to take a great solo, whether it's a John Coltrane solo, a Brent Mason solo, it doesn't really matter. What you'll probably find is at designated points, they're hitting these really important notes from the chords. And that's what strings the whole thing together. If you were to look at the skeleton of their solos, that's what you would find is the thing that is holding the architecture of the solo together. So then I was thinking like, well, once I get to that E, the sort of movement is descending. So it kind of wants to go to the C sharp, but I don't want to go there straight away. Otherwise it just is a boring arpeggio. There's no drama in that. So then I thought, okay, well, I'll go down here. I've got to the 4th. In classical music, a 4th is a dissonance. We hear it as a cool sound, But classical musicians call it a dissonance because it wants to resolve down. And that's a useful thing to be aware of, and it's a useful tool to have. So you might go... Going straight to the 3rd degree after playing the 4th does have a very prim and proper classical sound to it. It sounds perfect, but it's perhaps not the kind of country sound you want. That's where we can borrow a chromatic note. Now, for those of you not familiar with it, chromatic basically just means color. And in music, what that refers to is any note that is not part of the key that you are in. So we are in the key of A major, we are playing an A major chord. The note C does not belong in A major. It belongs in the parallel minor. So we are using a technique that classical theorists would call modal interchange. And modal interchange is where you borrow notes from the minor scale or the major scale of the key you're in. So we're borrowing notes from A minor. We have to give them back. We can't linger too long in A minor, otherwise it will sound like we are in the wrong key. But if you do it the right amount, then it can sound really exciting. It's quite similar to, say, walking over hot coals. It's exciting when you see someone do it really quickly, but they're not going to sit down and have a picnic on those hot coals. And that's the kind of guiding principle I have when playing chromatic stuff. Too much of it, it sounds bad. Just the right amount, it's the best. So I hit that, and the gravitational pull goes up. But I also string that out. It's about drama, you know what I mean? Like, we're storytellers. We just don't have words. We've got to use notes to do it. And so if I went, there's not as much sort of narrative in there. I want it like that. So that's kind of my initial approach. I will go through and look at different ways you can play through chords, and you can link chords, and because it can get, you know, moderately complicated, and there are, you know, endless possibilities for different things you can do. But I think initially coming to terms with the fact that you're not thinking about this from the point of just scales, because I think that too often people just go, oh, I'll just play that scale and it'll be fine. I hear it all the time when I sort of, if I'm at a bar having a drink with a friend and there's another band playing and they're not, say they're medium level sort of musicians, not absolute top-notch ones, that's kind of what I hear. It's this meandering, you know, it's like writing a poem. A lot of people, the vast majority of people in English-speaking languages, English-speaking countries, can read and write English. But that doesn't mean that they're poets. There's another level of understanding about words and structure and syntax that someone like Shakespeare had that the average person doesn't have. Now, I know Shakespeare's a genius, but you can, with a little bit of practice, and again, it's your ear that is really going to lead you, you can just get a feel for it. So I would encourage you to just, maybe if you got a loop pedal or a freeze pedal, just put on an A major chord in the background and find those notes, find them in all positions on the guitar, and just initially know where they are and know the sound that they have, the different qualities. Every note in a scale has its own quality. And if you spend enough time getting to know it, and who knows, with this coronavirus, you might get to know it real well, you want to be able to, like the flavor, you know, if someone gives you vanilla, you know what vanilla is. If someone gives you cinnamon apple, you know what cinnamon apple is, barbecue, so forth. You want to hear that third, like, third sounds like this. The sixth that we played before, that F sharp, also sounds really sweet, but there's this tension in that sweetness. There's a bit of bitterness because it wants to go back to the stable note of the fifth. So you want to get to know those notes, get to know those scales, get to know how they can link, and then you can actually build these little bridges. And this is where you can get into the realm of playing really interesting chromatic stuff without it becoming theoretically complex. I never think about modes, ever. I know what they are, I can explain them theoretically, but improvising never crosses my mind. It's a waste of time. And that's because I'm just using my ear. So if I played that F sharp and I was eventually going to go back to my E, I might want to increase that drama by going up to a G, going slightly away from the E, which means it's almost like pulling back an arrow. Like you pull it back even further, the tension increases even more. Then I go back to the F sharp, and then I might go down to the F. Doesn't belong in the key of A, but it sounds cool. And then down to the E. Or I could do an actual chromatic walk up to the E. I could go F, open D, E flat, D. So if we have that, I might go, then up to the G. That kind of thing. You start to get into kind of real jazz country territory, which I find particularly exciting. But even if it's very straightforward country stuff, what you'll find, a lot of those pedal steel bends, you'll play, here's a tonic, this is an A, and I have a pre-bent sixth, which goes down to the fifth, and then often what will happen then is they'll hit the ninth, which then has to go up to the third. Like that. So you can see it clearly. And that's all about getting your intonation in. I know my guitar's slightly out of tune, but when I'm bending, I actually have more control over it. So I'm going to do a couple more videos on this. If you've got any questions, please hit me up, send me a message, write a comment, because I'm very passionate about trying to help guitar players understand playing to a chord, playing through changes, whether it's jazz, blues, country, bluegrass, you name it. You can find me on Instagram at the Rev Dr. Z. Please subscribe and hit the bell so you get updates through this quarantine coronavirus period. I'm going to try and keep the guitar community stimulated with information and things that you can work on. I feel there's no reason why we can't all become better guitar players in this period of time. And find me on Facebook. I've got an artist page there, and there's a bit of a Facebook group community thing happening where other guitar players just interact and talk about gear and techniques and their favorite guitar related things. So thank you for listening, and wash your hands, stay safe, and catch you next time.